on May 26th. We are going to get started. I'm going to turn it over to Jim and the Weston and Sampson team to talk about the concept. There was a concept distributed earlier this morning that they put together, and I know they have some other items for the intersections that they'll be reviewing with us. And then just after we have this whole discussion before the end of the meeting, I'd just like to touch base and pick up on our membership discussion that we were going to have last time, but then we lost a quorum and a couple of members had to go. So, and then just to note that Jason Federico will be joining us at some point. He'll pop in. So thank you, and I'll turn it to Jim.
Thanks, Lauren. We will endeavor to be expedient so that we have plenty of time for the membership talk. There we go. Whoops. And I'll share screen. Just if you could confirm that you can see the presentation.
We can see your post-attendee Zoom screen.
Okay, that's no help. Let's try that again. Oh. It's kind of a funny thing. Screen one in Teams is the inverse of the way it is in Zoom. So
I always get caught up when I switch to Teams. We can see it now, though.
All right, great. So as you know, this is the working group for the Elm Street Engagement and Design agenda today. I know it's been sent around, but we'll do discussion of the status and update of the public input survey, section concepts, and we'll talk about next steps. One of those key next steps is second public forum on the 7th of June. And then, of course, as Lauren was mentioning, the membership discussion and any other business you want to discuss. So real quick, I'll go through status. So as you know, we've had a couple additional work group meetings under task 1. We had our first public meeting back a little while ago. The public survey has been launched, and so far we have 126 responses. I'll talk more about those in a couple of minutes. From our last meeting, we had done the field visits, but we worked in the results and started preparing concepts. We talked with you a little bit about those last time in terms of stick figure layouts, but at this point we have concepts that have actually been put together for each of the 3 sections, if you will, of Elm Street. So the mid section, which is the one that you received, and then the 2 ends. And Jeff Santa Cruz is going to review those in just a moment. Where are we with schedule? So I think, as you guys know, we've been pushing along with concepts and gathering data and things like that. You know, we've also been holding various meetings and trying to get to consensus. You know, I think a key thing today is that we need to develop consensus within this group around, you know, specifics on what concepts we want to go with, which elements of those concepts we want to go with. Again, I'll let Jeff talk about those some more, but in order for us to help you advance to the next stage, you know, we have to get to agreement on those things. Current schedule is to keep this within the July timeframe. You know, there's another public meeting that's coming up in June, and then in July, at the end of the process, we'll have a couple of public meetings. So this still fits within our original projected schedule. I think during the public meeting, or during the last work group meeting, excuse me, we elongated this by a month just to include July, but still fitting it within the construction season of next year. So shouldn't affect the overall outcome of the project. Online survey, as I mentioned, we have 126 responses so far. Last time we talked, we had 80, so we're continuing to get a bunch of good responses. I will say that it really hasn't affected, you know, like the percentages of folks or the ratio of, you know, which responses people are choosing to the various questions. This has remained essentially unchanged from the last time round. So still getting a lot of folks saying that when they visit Elm Street, they come every day. How they travel or where they're traveling to, excuse me, they're either going home or for recreation and exercise or shopping primarily. The interest in, improvement elements for Elm Street still includes primarily wider sidewalks, street trees, landscaping, and then a little bit later on here, or a little bit further down the priority list, I guess I might say, bike lanes, traffic calming, and things like that. This slide shows some of the comments that we've had in addition. This is the same sort of stuff that we saw last time around, so this really hasn't changed either. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeff and let him talk about concepts, unless anybody has questions about status or schedule or anything.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. So basically what we heard last time we were talking is that we're all kind of looking at this as there's kind of three distinct areas to this corridor. There's the village area, there's that core kind of between Brook Street and where Summer Street splits off, and then that harbor area. And what we kind of heard was in the village area was maximize parking, maintain, pedestrian accessibility, because there's not a lot of width there with the buildings, the existing sidewalks, and the parking. In that core area, as we call it, it was narrow the total width, add some landscaping, and improve pedestrian bicycle accommodations. And there was some back and forth on what might be the best ways to accommodate those two last uses. And then in the harbor area, it was maximize parking again, and then maintain that pedestrian accessibility. And with all areas, it was improve safety and slow down traffic.
Can I just make a comment? Last time we talked about making Elm Street one way in the village. And there was some discussion about that. Clark, I think you had some opinions about it. The more I thought about it, and I drive a lot with a trailer with my boat on it. If I'm coming from the north into the village on my way to the harbor, it's not going to bother me not to be able to go down Elm Street that way, but to go down to the Catholic Church and take a left and go to Parker Avenue boat ramp that way. And the more I think about it, the more beneficial I think it would be to the community to have that one way in there. That's just my comment. I throw that out for your consideration and edification.
Sure, and as we get a little bit more into the individual details, and some concepts that we've developed, we can certainly take a little closer look at that.
Okay.
So Jim, if you would. So what you probably got earlier today was kind of the thoughts on a core typical section. That would be what we heard was maintain back of sidewalk on the south side. There was a lot of concern with taking any sort of property or affecting those property owners on the south because they had been impacted previously back, I think Clark said it was in the 70s when some right-of-way was taken and whatnot. So we looked to kind of hold that and work our way toward or I shouldn't say south side, technically, I guess. I should say west side and east side. No, I'm sorry, I apologize. No, it is north and south. Thinking of the other project. So what we looked at was an 8-foot parking and providing parking along the south, doing an 11-foot lane adjacent to the parking, actually doing an 11-foot lane with a 12-foot shoulder, a 1-foot shoulder, so it's a total 12-foot lane, about a 10-foot grassed area and a 6-foot sidewalk on that north side. That still fits within the right-of-way. There would be some slight impacts to the frontages along there. Certainly the width of the landscape island could be adjust it a little bit, to try and minimize if there's a fence or a shrub along a particular property that would be difficult to deal with. We can certainly, adjust a little bit. But that's kind of what the thought was for an initial concept for this area. Certainly, I know one of the things the chief has already indicated is he preferred not to have a parking space opposite the fire department, and that's fine. What we could do is just maybe show a little bit of a 2-foot or 3-foot grassed area there, so it's not enough width for officially a car to park, but allows the fire truck more room to maneuver through there. I will tell you, I am not anticipating that's where the actual crosswalk is. I just kind of wanted to give an idea of what a bump out would look like on this corridor if we were to do it. I actually anticipate it is going to be closer to the existing crosswalk to the west, past the driveway to the safety complex.
Jeff, could you just go through the numbers again?
Sure.
You said that there's no taking, and we don't want to do any takings of the neighbor's front yard,
Correct.
but from the south going north, what the width of the sidewalk, parking, drive aisle, grassy
Jim-
area, and sidewalk is again?
Sure. Jim, could you zoom in a little bit to that area that has the dimensions on it, possibly?
I'm going to try and do that in a different view.
Yeah, you just got to go. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, zoom in a little bit more.
Yeah.
You would. If it'll let you. So basically what we were looking at is, it's hard because I don't have the pointer.
It looks like 6, 8, 11, 11, 10, and 6.
Right, and the one piece you're missing is there is a little 1-foot shoulder there that was just too narrow to try and throw a dimension in, but that is a 1-foot kind of shoulder between the edge line and the curb line on that other side.
Oh, whoops. Sorry.
That's all right. So that kind of is, like I say, the approximate 8-foot is the narrowest parking spot we like to consider as a parallel spot, just given opening doors. Not everyone parks right. Not everyone parks up tight to the curb line. With this, some of the considerations you have to have is, with a 6-foot sidewalk, are you comfortable allowing the, say, less comfortable bicyclists, i.e. the younger kids and stuff, from being on the sidewalk and sharing that space potentially with adults? The one advantage of going to this narrower width and narrowing this up like this is it does act as traffic calming, and it does slow traffic down through here, which means the more seasoned and maybe mid-level bicyclists will feel more comfortable on this short quarter-mile stretch, being able to be in the lane with cars. Riding around the community and seeing a lot of the different roadways you have, short of the major state roads like 28 and whatnot, a lot of your areas already are, 11 and 12 foot wide. Maybe they've got a 2-foot shoulder in some areas, and your bicycles are sharing them now. So it's not like we're departing dramatically from what else is happening in the community. One thing we talked about was possibly doing a 14-foot wide lane on each side to kind of provide the official shared use area. Obviously, that has the downside that it does keep the pavement wide. It does result in slightly higher travel speeds as people get wider lanes. So this is kind of what we thought was a good balance. Now, if for some reason you said we want a 7-foot sidewalk on the south, we would take it from that green area, the landscaped, and cut that down to, say, a 9-foot. If you wanted to widen the north side sidewalk, the issue to consider is there are some telephone poles that if you you can see them here, they're just on the edge between the sidewalk and the landscaped area, so they wouldn't actually impact the width of the sidewalk in terms of usable area in those areas. So this is kind of what we thought was a good balance between the different things we talked about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to the other concepts and then kind of come back and get comments overall, just so you can kind of see maybe how the different pieces fit together. Jim, would this actually be easier if I bring it up on my screen and share it?
Either way is fine with me, Jeff.
Yeah, if I could, just the reason I'm saying that is then I can use my pointer as I'm talking.
Yep.
So you have to stop sharing in order. Here we go. All right. So the next piece we took a look at was kind of this entry into the village area. And kind of as you mentioned, right now this is very, very narrow. And so for the current time, oh, wait a minute, are you actually seeing my screen? Sorry. Now, can you see this screen? Sorry. Okay. We pretty much took it as there's not really much you're going to change here short of the potential for a one-way. So taking the one-way kind of flow off, we kind of looked at trying to create this entry into the village. Couple things we looked at is the existing last parking space actually ends right here on my plan. And to the current center line, it's about 8.5 feet, which means that lane is only 8.5 feet in that area. And I think, you know, we kind of showed that picture last time of the SUV there and how tight it felt. So what's happening is cars are actually coming around this corner, sometimes in the other lane to avoid this car, which then requires these cars to move over. So what we looked to do here is we actually took out this parking spot, kind of built a bump out that actually kind of guides you from these parking, kind of points right to the back of that space and provides, I think it's 9 3/4, almost 10 feet here. That allows us to do a couple things. It allows us to get a crosswalk in here, which the closest crosswalk is actually further down at Main and then further up here at Stevens. The other piece we did was we actually kicked the sidewalk over further, kind of lined it up with the edge of the sidewalk as you're approaching Stevens. And that does a couple things for us. It gives us a consistent kind of roadway cross-section through here in terms of width. It allows us to add more parking. So even though we've taken one out here, we've gained like 4 more spaces over here than what's there today. We had also been charged with looking at how do we potentially connect this piece here, the old Highland Ave, as a pedestrian bicycle corridor. So what we would do there is from this crosswalk up, actually do a 10-foot wide sidewalk so that the bicyclists could either come across and enter the ramp here and continue up. And if they're coming down, they could either come down to Stevens, act like a car and make a left or a right, or they could go across and then walk their bike across the crosswalk if they so choose. These are in this area, we're at the same width. So basically this plan actually ties in to the other green landscape plan you saw. We've actually shifted the sidewalk down a little bit, which allows a crosswalk, excuse me, down a little bit so that we don't have to look at the potential of an apex ramp here where both crosswalks would exit from the same ramp. Makes it a little bit more obvious and again provides a traffic calming feature. There would be no parking in this area, which there really isn't today, but with the addition of a few extra parking here, these people now have the ability to perhaps have some guest parking or whatnot. So that was that piece. And then we did take a look at what you had done previously down in the harbor. So what we looked at was a couple different options. We looked at Summer Street being one way in, 15-foot wide, so it's a little bit wider, so the fire truck getting through here doesn't feel pinched, especially where it's a curb. The little bit narrower 11 and 12-foot lanes down here further back weren't as much of a concern because there's no actual center island. So as cars move aside to get out of the way of the fire truck, there is more width to get through there. Coming down in, we changed the angled parking through here into parallel, added parallel on the side around the corner, And then what we did here was we actually, instead of having these two handicap spaces, ADA spaces around the corner, which really don't meet current standards, we actually kind of did this cut into the sidewalk, since we have wider sidewalks here that provide you that 5-foot hatched area that you're required to have adjacent to a parking spot. We've actually used this design in another location on a project Jonathan and I have worked on, so we know it does meet standard. And so we've been able to replace these two ADA spaces as close to A, the crosswalk, and B, the entrance to the VFW here. Approximately before, these parking structures really weren't striped, but in kind of going out there, looking at pictures and whatnot, it seemed to be there was about 8 spaces here with these 3, was 11. If I remember my count, we're at either 22 or 23 now in this area. So we've actually been able to almost double the amount of parking in these areas. Here, we've actually shifted the roadway over slightly to provide a little bit slower corners on both sides, still being able to adopt for larger vehicles. We actually widened the approach width here to up to 16 feet. And that could be adjusted a little bit more if need be, because we do have still a little bit more width here if there was concern. We were just trying to keep slow vehicles down. Yes, I understand that also slows the fire trucks down slightly, but we can work with you to adjust it a little bit more. But we looked at the vehicles and watched the cars up there, and they do go quite fast around the corner. So we were trying to slow them down and get some traffic calming in there. Then what would happen is when you're back on your outbound side, you'd come up to a stop sign and you'd make your left. So very similar to you have a stop sign here today, we would move that traffic coming up and having a stop sign over here. The other option we looked at was everything in this piece here to the east stays the same up until this point. And then we create the 2-lane roadway for Summer Street, continuous through, and Margin Street, instead of going straight, actually now curves and comes into Summer Street to form a T intersection. In fact, again, we've created, an increase in parallel parking spaces here. This actually increases this park area quite a bit because you've now taken out this extra little connection. It's actually increased your green space here, which allows you to maybe do low plantings or grass or whatever, and actually does not impact the view shed because you still will be able to see right down. One thing Jonathan and I were kind of joking about, that if you actually built this area up, you could build it so as you're coming down Elm Street, the grass sits up and you actually see the ocean right over the top of the grass. So you're actually kind of hiding this road in the background to kind of increase that kind of look to it. And again, we're creating some sidewalks around the outside edges. One thing that is a benefit here is these sidewalks actually get larger. They go from the face of the existing buildings out. They vary in width, which allows you to have maybe some possibility of some street trees, or maybe some outdoor seating, some outdoor dining, or something along these pieces that you don't currently have to kind of bring some of these amenities into the area. That was where we were. We didn't go too far into colorizing all these options. We wanted to kind of talk through them with you, get some thoughts before we move forward to kind of bring this out to the public. So with that, I'll stop talking and look to get some input from the group on what they think.
I'll jump in first. The thing that the public's going to jump on us all over is if we don't have the street names right. I don't think that what you've got labeled on the screen right here of Summer Street,
This one?
that one and the other one is correct. I think Summer Street ends at the Legion intersection, and
Okay.
these have different names. One is Cove Road. Lauren, do you remember what these are exactly? Elm Street and Margin Street. You want to get the start stop of those correct as well.
Yeah, I believe Elm goes to here.
So Let me jump in. Elm goes as far as Margin Court on that side where your pointer is. And Elm does go as far as the crosswalk at the American Legion Post. That building next to it is actually an Elm Street address.
This one, okay.
Yeah, and the little short chute in front of the hotel has the name of Cove Road. And it's a
Okay.
whopping total. It's probably the shortest road in Cohasset. So it is what it is.
And on the eastern end, Border Street starts right at the War Memorial, right?
Yeah, mid-intersection type of thing. The first address on there, and that's what I was just looking at real quick, is actually past the end of what we have delineated as the end of the project. That's pretty much the beginning of the Border Street numbering.
And I just looked at Google Earth, and Google Earth labels this area Summer Street, so no bad on you guys. It's just that everything that you do or say, people, they just want to know where they live. They don't want to get
And Clark,
confused.
honestly, I should have known better because I was involved in reviewing the hotel developments which had actual Elm Street addresses. So that's bad on me for not catching it when we were going through drafting it. So,
Well, back to the important things. I personally like this concept. As long with the stipulation, as long as the view corridor is preserved and we don't get things growing up there, because the amount of effort from the planning board and the harbor committee that's gone into creating that view corridor, that is really the jewel of this whole thing. The rest of it, I really like that concept. I think there's no need for Cove, as long as the emergency vehicles, and I can see the top of the chief's head, and it's not getting too red, so he must be okay with it. Oh, there I see the rest of him too. Oh, okay. You must have your UFOs on, Chief, so you're very comfortable. But I personally like this concept very much, as long as with that stipulation that the view corridor is preserved.
So
and
let me
that
jump.
was. Oops,
Yeah,
go
excuse
ahead.
me, Jeff. Just let me jump in because these are the couple of things that came back from residents that live right on that island. One, and I mentioned it to Laura, and I've mentioned to other couple of souls, is people moving westbound coming down to Elm Street from Border Street. The stop sign at the end there is nothing more than a suggestion for most folks.
Yeah.
They come through that at speed, rolling stops, I guess, and then they continue along their merry little way. And that's one of the concerns of the neighbors in that area. So that's why I was the one that originally made the comment, because this is what was brought back to me by the residents down there. What if we went one way, so eastbound toward the harbor on that little short chute that's alongside of the island, the major island, and then put parking where you put parking, so that anybody coming from Border Street would have to go down Cove Road and make a stop and a left.
Yeah.
So would that calm the traffic? So that was one piece that the neighbors down there brought to me, was the stop sign. And the other piece was redesigning that little, the entrance of Cove Road back onto Elm Street / Margin Street, so as to slow the traffic there. Their concerns were, especially the folks that lived at 110-4, that people come over the rise on Margin Street at speed and cut across that corner. They don't even go to the yellow line to get there. So, and that includes knuckleheads like me on bicycles, not only cars, but the bicycle traffic. So, as far as that area there, I'm a fan of that one-way shot that was proposed by the neighbors down there. It doesn't impede fire trucks or police cars outbound from public safety. And that little bump out that you're suggesting, Jeff, if we have to slow down a little bit to make a corner, these are fire trucks, not race cars. I try to convince my guys of that on a regular basis. So it's not a bad thing. So, whatever we have to do, if we lose a matter of seconds to get around that corner and it's safe, well, that's the price of safety, and we're okay with that.
Okay,
I'm kind of a fan of this one, this thought process, whatever it might take. The
Okay.
only comment I will make, again, and this goes back to, my final comment, I guess is what I'll go. What Tim just said, people trying to come from Atlantic Ave and make the left onto Cove Road to bring their boats to the harbor, you want to be careful about infringing on that little, I see that bump out there right in front of the hotel.
Yeah.
I think you just need to have enough width to keep that in, that as a possible. Not that, somebody hauling a big boat is not going to have a problem, but the rest of the folks that try to come and go on a daily or a weekly basis because they don't have moorings in the harbor, it might be a little bit difficult for them to make that corner in. As Tim said, to come through the center of town and have to go all the way to St. Anthony's is one thing, but to try and get to the harbor and not be able to make that left from Atlantic Ave, I'm not exactly sure what the route would be, how you would get there. Because you can't make a left on Brook Street. You can't make a lot of other turns. So just something to think about on that one too. That's what I had. Sorry about that.
no. One thing I would say, Chief, just as a point, one thing we find when you do one-way shoots like this, these speeds actually will start to increase now because they know there's nobody else coming and they got this whole kind of road. So sometimes we suggest not doing these slip ramps, but having the two-way traffic similar to this option, just because that visual of another car coming toward you a lot of times can have a traffic calming effect. And then certainly the issue about people coming up and over the rise on Margin, now they would be the ones coming up to a stop. So just kind of where my head was, I'm not saying I disagree with this other option. It's just that while it's going to slow traffic westbound, it may actually speed up eastbound if it's a one-way. So it's just something we should all kind of think about and maybe talk about as part of the solution.
To add an additional stop sign on that easternmost corner, if we went to one way, that takes care of that business too.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, you could look at doing a stop sign here and stopping them here. It's just, are they going to treat that stop sign here the same way they treat this stop sign up here? If nobody's coming from this way, are they going to do the rolling stop?
Somebody from Houston, Texas trying to call me. I wonder if that's junk or not. So, yeah, no, I hear you loud and clear. I'm just, again, these were the thoughts that came from the neighbors on what they see. And that's all, really the only thing I was really trying to bring up.
No, I agree.
Because
Great.
and the wider, having a wider sidewalk down in that neighborhood, that kind of speaks to my other comment about the midsection, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I wanted everybody to have a chance to speak about that, and then we can talk about the midsection. I got one other comment about that.
The only thing with this option, I will let you know, is technically right now, there's a telephone pole right here we'd have to take into consideration. So either we look to get it relocated, or perhaps we tighten this curve up a little bit, take some out of this sidewalk, and maybe shift this just slightly to avoid that pole, or at least put it on the corner if we don't want to engage in that as part of this project. So that's just something, so everyone's aware that this does have that issue of a telephone pole to be addressed. Anybody else, any comments on this piece?
Yeah, I'll make a couple comments. I like the thinking around this part of the project, but I'm on board with Bob's concept of a one-way, the shoot and maintaining a little bit of cove. And I think that the radius on the north side of that intersection, the one between Cove, Elm, and Margin, if you matched what you have on the other side of that intersection and put a crosswalk set back, that would probably be okay. I'd like to see, perhaps a crosswalk on the north western side of the triangle. And the big issue for me is
Yeah, Clark, we didn't detail all the crosswalks on
Yeah,
this plan, but yeah, definitely, we would put one here. The thought was, do you do one here because it's kind of the direct route through,
Right.
or, possibly here, we can certainly work with you where you want them.
Yeah, I think, adding them in a bunch of places makes sense, but I still think in terms of the overall section through the road, I don't like the 10-foot grassy area on the north side. I don't have a problem with widening the sidewalk to 6 feet, but I really think that the proposed sidewalk on the south side should be 10, 11 feet and be a shared use area. And maybe have 2 or 3 feet of grass between that and the parking. Just so that it makes it that much more pedestrian friendly and safer and multi-use. I don't see any benefit of having the proposed grassy area as extensive as it is at 10 feet on the north side. And I really think the shared use path needs to be 10 or 11 feet plus grass and then parking.
So if we did that, we'd
You
be
guys following
adding,
me?
we'd be doing 5 feet more here to get you out to, or 4
Yeah.
feet more to get you out to 10,
Yes,
plus another 2 feet. That
Yep.
would mean this island would go down below 5 feet, which means we wouldn't be able to have street trees that would survive long
That's-
term.
I mean, you don't have them now. And
No, but you
I
do
get-
have,
I just
Sorry.
think that the grassy area, I think that the real benefit is a comfortable, generous sidewalk and a shared use sidewalk that kids could use on their bikes. And I think that even though there's more driveways along the south side, I just think that it wants to be along the south side. And now that would also mean there'd be some changes on the on either end, but I think those could be accommodated on the west end. On the east end, I just think that the triangular island has to, that the edge of that has to shift to the north by the 6, 8, whatever feet. And
yeah,
then
this
that gives you-
would get adjusted to match
Yeah.
whatever we've done down here if it's the straight piece. So if we pulled this in because we're doing an 11-foot lane here, we would match that here and put the sidewalk here.
Yeah, you just adjust it up.
Exactly.
What you've done in front of the Legion to the War Memorial by narrowing that unbelievable sea of pavement, I think is great. But I'm just been convinced since the beginning of this, thinking about this project, that the real comfortable, generous, multi-use walkway wants to be along the south side, and I'm not comfortable with trying to sell the change to the Elm Margin Street from being a straight road. I just think the concept of a one-way that's shifted to the north a little bit, and the Cove Road with a stop sign to go further to the west. I think that's the right concept. Obviously tweaking radiuses and where the sidewalks go, crosswalks go, that's open for discussion. I'm entirely convinced that the biggest thing that we can do here is have at least a 10-foot wide shared use along the southern edge of Elm Street.
Would you consider if we did like an 8-foot with a 2-foot grass, and that allows you to get a 5-foot grass strip that might be able to have street trees on the other side? Just because you've got street trees on the south side, those big existing trees.
Well,
that would line
I mean,
that north side.
I suppose, if we're fighting over inches, 2 people can walk on a 5-foot wide sidewalk. Maybe you adjust the sidewalk width on the north side to 5 instead of 6, and allow street trees on one side or the other, not necessarily both.
Right, yeah, we'd be talking just on the one side.
Yeah.
The reason I say 8 is that is what is kind of the minimum Mass DOT shared use path standard is 8 feet. And then if we certainly did a 2-foot grass, people can walk up near the edge of the 8 foot and still not, like you said, feel like they're falling off the curb or whacking a car on that side.
Yeah, I mean, 8 feet is certainly an improvement over the 6, I think.
Okay.
My preference would be like 10. I think shared use has to be 10 or 11.
You
So,
can go as low as 8. They will allow an 8. That's like the absolute minimum.
right. But, if we're dealing with minimums, I still think perhaps instead of a parking spot, you could use your crosswalk example next to the firehouse exit to make those areas, instead of a parking spot, those areas where you could put street trees, and to give yourself a little bit more room. I'm just convinced the biggest bang for the buck, the most benefit to the most people is a shared use walkway that's 10, 11 feet wide, plus 2 feet of grass at least to where cars are, just so that there's enough room for the people to do their thing without being hindered or affected or feel intimidated by the fact that there's cars right next to them.
So just so I understand this, people are going to open their car door and step out onto a 2 foot strip of grass.
Well, I mean,
I'm
yeah,
not sure
sure.
I'm not sure that's. I mean, I understand what you're saying about getting a buffer, but I mean that grass is just going to wear away and look like junk over time.
Maybe, but those parking spots along Elm Street, they get used intermittently, but it's not like it's full time. I mean, maybe on the western end near town and on the eastern end near the harbor, they're going to get used more. And in terms of the detail, I completely understand what you're saying about people stepping out onto grass, stepping in dog poop. Probably not the best. Those kind of details are critical, but in terms of 10 or 11 feet of a shared use path on the southern edge, that it's just one person here, but since the beginning of this thing, that's going to give people, pedestrians, little kids on bikes, a really generous, comfortable area to do their thing that they don't have now.
So let me jump in real quick again as observing traffic on Elm Street for 40 years. I completely agree with Clark that south side of Elm Street is where all the kids are. There's some traffic on the other side of the road. It's walking traffic, but the number of bicycles or anything else that I've ever seen on the north side toward the firehouse are minimal at best. The other side is the kids, especially obviously from Memorial Day through Labor Day, heading for sailing lessons coming down Elm Street. So having a wider shared use path on that south side makes absolute sense to me, just as an observation of what I've seen over the years. So widening that out and taking some of the green space on the other side, I think also makes some kind of sense. So, Jeff, your thought process of 8 feet, I don't know the difference between 8 and 10, Clark, I don't know if that's going to matter that much, as long as it's wider and safer, and it creates a little bit better sight line for the kids that are riding that sidewalk, that they don't have to worry about cars backing out of driveways. That's not a bad thing. So a lot of driveway cuts there, guys. So that's the one thing I worry about the kids on the sidewalk with the bikes. Right. But as we all know, adults on bicycles do not ride on sidewalks for the most part. Right. If you ever saw me on a sidewalk, shoot me. Okay?
No,
that's
we're not going to shoot you,
do.
Bob. There'll be no shooting.
And this is recorded, so yeah, definitely we would not admit to that on tape. So, so another question I have is if everything wants to shift to the opposite side as it's currently shown, and we just admitted that there's more driveway openings there, so that means we're actually showing less parking than we have if we flipped that to the other side. If we had more parking on the other side, we've got less driveways that impede the number of parking spaces that we could get. Would people be open to flipping parking to the opposite side?
Can I say something?
Yeah,
Can I say something? So, in context of the connection from the village to the harbor, literally to the harbor, if we shift the road to the north side or eliminate the green strip on the north side, the roadway aligns with the opening at the very far end at the harbor, number one. Number two, the wider sidewalk on the south side, as Clark is promoting, is also something that aligns with the opening at the north end of the new condominium project at the harbor. And the fact that the housing on the south side is already closer to the street than any of the houses on the north side makes it much more sensible to try to sell this to more residents on the south side by having more dimension in front of their home, by shifting the road to the north and having the green or walkway on the south side, because that gives them more dimension between their homes and travel lanes. I'm in favor of widening the sidewalk. I'm a proponent of 8-foot walks, not 11-foot walks, but that could be worked out as details occur.
Yeah.
That whole thing connecting into the village center, if we end up with a one-way at the village going into the village, that means that the wider sidewalk connects all the way down to the main corner at the bank in the village center, because we now have eliminated a travel lane that's squeaking by the bank. And this whole thing has more continuity all the way to the harbor if we do that.
Right.
The second thing is if you look at the studies that we've already done, there's the possibility that with the parking on the south side being intermittent in this middle section, you could possibly have street trees at the end of the parking spaces, which
Yep.
gives us the street trees and the landscape systems on the south side, where the people have actually lost landscape because there was a taking many, many years ago. At the far east end where the triangle is, when the road is shifted to the north side, it gives us more room in the triangle. So if you do this alternative, you have more room in the triangle, more space in the triangle. If you do the other alternative where we don't have this one-way sweep, you have even more space in the triangle in front of the condo project, and you're not putting as much landscape in front of the houses on the north side in order to make the turn onto Border Street. But when the road shifts to the north, when it shifts to that north side of the road, the dimension from the right-of-way lines or from the back of sidewalk out to the curb line can come all the way around over here to Summer Street. So you have a uniform dimension all the way down the street to a curb line, which allows for parking, allows for a wider sidewalk, and it allows for street trees. If in an intermittent pattern in the middle section, for sure. Once you get down here and you need more parking, then you start to lose some of those opportunities for having continuity in the street trees. I suggest that you look at the studies that we've already done, because there's already been some thinking about how this might work out in terms of connections to the harbor, context to the Captain's Walk, and also easing these huge amounts of asphalt at these intersections and making some of these intersections a little bit more efficient and more safe, and having pedestrian crossings where they're most meaningful relative to getting to the harbor. That's the key thing. The harbor connection is really, in this case, about pedestrian walks and hierarchy.
Just to jump real quick back to Jonathan's question about moving the parking to the other side of Elm Street. As Mike just mentioned, that there's already been the taking on that south side. So part of the problem is that there is no parking in the driveways, or very little parking in the driveways, because the driveways for the most part are fairly small or short. That's part of the issue there. That's why those folks are driven out onto the street. On the other side of the street, being the north side, everybody has a long driveway because there was never a taking. There's very seldom are there cars parked on the opposite side of the street, unless you have a situation where all the parking on the other side's already been taken. So that's just, again, it's just an observation. So I know the folks down there would would prefer that the parking be left where it is, just so they can access their houses. Again, that's what the comments that come back to me from the folks that live there. That's just another comment.
Thank you, guys. That's great. Appreciate it. And yeah, I can see, definitely, we pretty much tie in with the center line here. We're a little off, but like you said, if we shift to the north, then this lane here lines up and sees down into the harbor, Mike, like you were mentioning. I can see that. The idea of one way down here, I guess my question is, you're talking one way out so that inbound traffic has to come in through Brook Street and around?
I think so. I think that's the right way to do it. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, that was my suggestion earlier. I think
Mike,
that's.
what do you think?
Well, I thought this was a really interesting notion that Chief Sylvia brought up, that this historically that was discussed, but obviously it didn't happen. But it might be reasonable to revisit it. And obviously, if it's one way, it should be one way out. In other words, westbound.
Right.
And that it actually gives us a few more parking spaces to the west on the north side of the road. And it gives us a wider sidewalk all the way from the corner of South Main Street, all the way here to Brook Street.
Yep.
And we can still maintain those 3 or 4 spaces in front of the bank building there on the south side at the same time. So it really does help a lot, I think, as long as Chief Sylvia and others with boats and what have you, if they want to come down Brook Street and make the right-hand turn, as long as that is satisfactory to the consensus, I'm good with that idea.
Would Brook Street, if I could just real quick, would Brook Street stay two-way, or would you look to have Brook Street one-way northbound only so that people kind of make the right? Because one thing I noticed when I was down there is there were a full-size tractor trailer delivery truck parked on Brooks, and it was tight to get around that truck.
Well,
Right.
if you make it one way to the north, that means that theoretically you have more parking on that street. Because right now you don't have any parking because it's 2 ways.
That's right.
So you could get either a wider sidewalk on the let's call it on the east side, and or you get just a parking lane and a wider one-way road, one-way travel lane. So that's a reasonable question.
The only issue with that is if you're coming down Elm Street toward the village, you go one way to the intersection down by the end of the bank where the old market used to be. Then if you want to come back to, say, go to French Memories, you have to take a very sharp left. That's the only drawback with making Brook Street one way. Otherwise, if we can solve that one, I'd be all for it. And just a question, Bob, in your recollection, when this was proposed before and not considered, do you know what the thinking was? Was it just trailers, or was there any other reason?
So part of it was the village merchants, and that's something that we all would have to have a chat with them, Chamber of Commerce, because the comment that was made was, well, when I come down through the village, heading west, and I don't see a parking space in front of French Memories, the old convenience store, the bank, whatever, I make the right onto Elm Street, go around the block, and come back down through again. So the merchants were one of the ones that weren't big fans of the idea of Elm Street being one way for that purpose. So, I think that no one really discussed Brook Street being one way at that time. It was just that short shoot of Elm Street that the conversation was that it's just not wide enough to do everything that they wanted to do, and that included parking on both sides, hence the reason they put the cutout in front of the bank, and to do everything else. So, I don't think, Tim, to be honest, there was a lot of pushback from the neighbors or even the merchants on Elm Street, namely, Fleming's or the real estate offices. Their pushback was more they wanted their parking. And if we were to create additional parking on Elm Street, past where the last marked parking space is, because we're now not worrying about a travel lane there. There might be some, it's a trade-off, but it might be one that people would be willing to look at.
Well, plus if it's one way on Brook Street, parking on Brook Street, you got that person who can't park in front of French Memories, comes around the corner on Brook Street. Now he finds a parking space around the corner where
Right.
now there isn't any.
Well, I just wanted to make one point relative to what we're talking about. I think that making Brook Street and the end of Elm Street one way may make sense to a lot of people in the context of the larger project, where we're really trying to rethink both the ends and the middle of Elm Street and make this connection for both things. So in this larger context, people may have a bigger appetite for change. I mean, I think that a lot of folks in Cohasset just don't like change, but if they're convinced and it's a part of a big project that has overall tremendous benefits for pedestrians and kids on bikes and stuff like that, I think that we might be able to sell it. And I really think it would be important to put it in as a concept to get public input as a part of our next
Yeah.
public forum.
Definitely.
Because, you can always change it back, but
That's
if
right.
you
One
sell
of the
it,
options anyway.
Tim, do you agree? Are people in Cohasset change averse?
I won't comment on that, Clark.
No. I mean, all right, you personally.
I'm working on 10-year time horizons in the harbor. A couple of comments. First of all, I did suggest to Tom Hamilton that he join this meeting. I don't know whether I know he was trying to. I don't know whether he ever made it or not. But
He's here
his
with us now.
input was that?
Tom is with us.
Oh, he is. So, Tom, you may be able to comment on the seeing how your real estate office is right there on the end of Elm Street. What having one way there around and then the one way Brooks coming the other way. What do you think? He's probably
You're on mute, Tom.
You're on mute, Tom. While he's doing that, the other thing that we should keep in mind is that gas station is going to be redeveloped. And I haven't seen any plans of that, but hopefully the planning board will be involved with that, and perhaps we can make that really fold into this whole concept.
So can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes, now we can hear you and see you, Tom. You look great.
You do too. I sent you a couple of messages because finding you guys on the planning board site is not easy, but I finally figured it out. It took me 30 minutes. So you ought to be more user friendly to start with in terms of your Zoom link. But yeah, I've been through, I think, making Elm Street one way from Brook to North Main maybe twice. And Frank Smith and I both objected to it early on because it was important from a visibility standpoint that people be able to drive into the village and go down Elm Street to the Cohasset Harbor Inn and see a friendly real estate office and see a friendly gift shop. I think the business has changed now, so it's not as important as it was to have good retail frontage on the street and visibility from people arriving in town. I think people arriving now all have picked out their broker, and you become a destination and they figure out you got to go around the corner. Elm Street parking is a disaster, and it's getting worse all the time with less and less spaces. And I went out, Chief, and I measured the distance between our front door side and the other side of Elm Street, and it's exactly the same distance as where the parking space is. And why I can't get them to redo a line and why the police department is so intent on stopping us from parking there is kind of beyond me. I've heard complaints about the fact that the sidewalk is too narrow for people with a baby carriage with 3 kids in it or 2 kids in it, but with telephone poles, and the trees narrow the sidewalk much more than having a couple more cars with their mirrors sticking out on that side of the street. So it's a phony argument. Why they persist in it is unclear to me, but I think there's some, politics going on.
You dropped off.
You froze up on us.
Okay. The Wi-Fi is not particularly good there in the village.
You can't hear me?
Oh, there you are. There you are, Tom.
I don't know. I guess it says my internet connection's unstable. I apologize.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Sure
Yes.
can.
Parking's always been an issue. And it's getting worse all the time. Frank Smith relies on people being able to stop and go and deliver their lamps and pick up stuff. He's got big semi-trailer trucks. At 11 o'clock this morning, there wasn't a parking space left on the street. So I've been parking, I guess, across the street in the space that this compact used to have until they decide to do something else with it because nobody's in the bank anymore. But I've been here for too long, 47 years. I've never seen an accident out there. I've never seen a time when the fire truck couldn't get through in an emergency or an ambulance. So to a degree, cutting just to widen the street, I think is a good argument. Making it one way now, if that opens up more parking spaces, more spaces, I think I'm for it. And I think Frank would be too now.
So Tom, do you
hear
think
that?
do you think if we had the extra parking along your side of the street and we had, let's call it a wider one-way lane westbound towards North Main Street, and a let's say an 8-foot sidewalk on the other side, do you think that we could have a tractor trailer park there and still have room for a car to get around? Would that work okay?
I'm not sure. When Frank Smith has his trailer truck, hardly room for one car to go by because the guys just don't, pay a lot of attention. And it's a real crazy show to get this trailer truck unloaded and get the stuff out of there and get the truck off the street. So, Cohasset's a little cow town. This is all dirt roads and carriages. So just a few years, accommodate a lot more traffic, a lot more people, and a lot street might be fine. Although I'm looking at Larry, just walked into my office. I don't know whether he feels good about that or not, because people will have trouble parking in front of his bank. So he's saying, and he's got parking issues.
So if I could jump in real quick. I think what Tom's saying is obviously parking is at a premium.
Oh,
And when you start talking about one-way roads, everybody, when Jason Federico, who just jumped on the line, and I first proposed one-way roads on Jason and Long Road, which are on either side of the common, on the pond side of the common, and making one way in and one way out and putting parking on both sides of the road, everybody thought that we had both lost our minds. Now that there's parking all over around the common, it didn't affect anybody's real life. And the change monster just kind of went away.
And you're the
There was a
hero.
lot of support, an awful lot of support. So I think the same thought process here is, what is the sale? The sale is if we can do something with Brook and we can do something with Elm and we can create additional parking so that the merchants have spots for people to use, whether it be Elm Street or Brook Street. I think the win-win there is a fairly easy thing to sell. I'm with Mike on that idea that how do we sell this? And I think we sell Elm Street as a continuation of what we did on North Main Street to try and create additional parking and slow traffic at the same time. It's all part of the concept of what began with the redesign of that end of the common. So I'm a huge fan of anything we can do to slow traffic and create parking and still give emergency access to us. If that means I have to drive a little bit farther with emergency vehicles to get back to the station, it doesn't break our hearts. We'll figure out a way around it. So it's a good thing. So I'm a big fan of that. And I think, to give the merchants
about it.
relief, I think that's a great idea too.
Okay,
Hey,
The only
just one
difference
more
with
point.
Elm Street and the Common is that you have merchants here and a bank here, and there's none of that up around the Common, and I think it works great around the Common.
I got one more point that we haven't talked about, and that's the Highland Ave area. As a design problem, I wouldn't spend much time on it other than indicate that, some trees and bushes it needs to be cleaned up so that it's an alternate for pedestrians and bicyclists. In general, I don't think it's going to take 50% of the pedestrian or bicycle traffic, maybe 10%, but just having it open and cleaned up, I think is enough of a design attention, and really spending your design attention on the other areas is gonna, I think, get more bang for the buck out of for your attentions.
As far as excuse me, Jeff, as far as the parking goes on Elm Street and Brook Street, one of the concepts, can you do something that just shows us exactly how many additional spaces we could get there and still have proper travel lanes if we went to one lane on Elm Street?
Yeah, Chief,
That might,
we're tasked with doing two concepts, basically end to end. So from what I'm kind of hearing from everyone, and I'm going to run through this, and if I'm wrong anywhere, somebody feel free to beat me. The corridor, we're going to shift north. I think we all agree to that, whether it's an 8-foot or a 10-foot sidewalk on the south, and we shift everything else north and adjust the landscape. Kind of seems like everybody's on board with that generally. We'll do that through the core. On this end, we'll keep the concept we've drawn, and then we can certainly then draw a concept that shows one way with all the parking in the lanes like we talked about. That'll be option 2 and how it ties into that core piece. Then on the harbor, we'll make the tweaks as you've suggested to the two concepts we've got drawn, whether it's one way, southbound with the return on the Cove Road, or whether it's realigned Margin Street. And those are the two we can bring to the public, knowing that the two ends can kind of be interchangeable depending on what people kind of want to see and not. Does that kind of make sense to what I've been hearing overall?
yes. That's
good.
That's exactly what we need to do, is we need to just have a couple options that are a part of our overall sort of consensus here as to a directions. I think that's good.
and Jeff, along that line, I think that second concept is, how do you maximize parking through the entire corridor?
Yeah.
And I think, the option down at the Cove is maximizing parking. One is maximizing parking, and one in the Village is maximizing parking. So maybe that's a good thing, and people can either buy in or buy out.
Yeah, and I was just taking a look. I'm going to share my other screen for a quick sec. I actually have the Google up. You were talking about this left turn. And let me know if you can see this screen now.
No.
What I'm seeing here is if we don't have an inbound lane.
Jeff, not yet. We can't see it yet.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Did it share my Google?
Yes.
Okay. It's not, usually it shows me a little box around it. So what I'm seeing here and hearing everything you're saying, this left is tougher. So since we don't need this inbound lane, we could actually shift this over. So the left turn is actually got a little more width here, and it's a little easier to turn. It's not so sharp right at the end. It's actually a little smoother and starts back here. So the car actually sits here making the left out, which makes it not quite as sharp because the cars can be aligned straighter to the intersection than making the little swing right at the end.
Yep.
So I think we can certainly, let me go down. So realistically, this is going to be ugly, but I'm going to do it.
But Jeff, you can see that from the last parking space here that's on the right-hand side of your screen on the Google thing. From there all the way down to that almost to that stop line, you can add parking in that stretch.
Yep, yeah.
And
in
you
here
can bump, and you
certainly.
can bump out, and you can bump out the curb line down in that vicinity where the stop line is. And you now have also the same thing happening on the other side of the street, the bank side of the street, where you can move that curb line, get a better sweep, and it gives, that's the origin of the wider sidewalk all the way down.
Yep, I agree with you. So this is almost the kind of the curb line somewhere along there. So the car actually would sit here coming out. This would bump out. You may actually be able to get a crosswalk in here now. Because
Right,
if the
yes.
car can come up and be aligned a little bit straighter,
Yes.
there may be room with a bump out here to actually come across here, which you don't have today. And
Yeah,
maybe
the crosswalk is right there where you've got your cursor. That's, I mean, it's,
No, I understand, but maybe you take that out in order to put more parking all the way up to this spot, and instead, we maybe do it down here, so you
Yeah,
can.
exactly.
maximize- Yep, I
Yep.
hear you, and I'm visualizing it as we're talking. This was that left turn that, like I said, if the car starts back and is a little straighter in here, it's not such a sharp, doesn't feel so sharp.
right.
You can start back a little sooner. So yep, that allows us to bump this corner out, shorten the actual pedestrian crossing, which makes this more advantageous maybe than this piece here.
Yeah, we just need to get, make sure that right turn lane there is generous enough for the fire trucks and all, because the other side of the street is sometimes pinched just around the corner there with the angled parking. There's that first stall that sticks way out, so.
Yep.
Yeah,
And the good thing is now the fire truck would be starting here, which actually puts it closer to this area in terms of being able to swing. So this radius, instead of being, an 80, 90 foot radius, maybe we can do a 50
yeah,
type of thing. But certainly, we can take a look at that. And that's, a final design detail, we can tweak that and do an actual
Yes.
turn. But yeah, we want to show the public as close to what we think it's going to be. So if we come back with it moved a little bit, people don't panic too much.
One other
Okay.
point about that stop sign you're talking about, Jeff,
Yeah,
is that's another one of those rolling stops. People look to their left and keep right on rolling, and you've got people walking across to the coffee shop trying to get run over. They're
Yeah.
playing Frogger in front of the coffee shop. It's not a good thing.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe tightening that up, making it still work for you, but tightening it up for cars isn't a bad thing then.
Yeah, I'm with Mike on the idea that, remember, that is a major response route for us. Just about everything that we, from the 3A corridor to everything on the north side of the town, or I should say west side of town as we're looking at it, that's how we get there.
Yeah.
So it would be helpful if, whatever we do, that we just keep that in mind.
Yeah, certainly.
What about proposing some tactile pavement at the beginning of the village and at the beginning of the harbor, so that there's an audible and texture sort of definition of those areas?
You can, just, I would caution that if you're talking like something on kind of, it feels like a rumble strip, whether it's cobbles or brick or something, the noise with residents, that's going to be their first concern.
What about the
Certainly.
pressed asphalt?
If you're going to do anything, the only problem with the asphalt, especially if this is a major route for the fire truck, doing some sort of pattern in asphalt after the first summer when it's 85, 90 degrees out there, it's flat. So if you were to do something, maybe you consider, if you did the crosswalk, is maybe you actually put either a concrete with a pattern to it or something a little more rugged.
Yeah.
So that the asphalt, the imprinted asphalt, it goes away.
Right.
It just doesn't stay there with the heat. There are a couple materials. There's a plastic, thermoplastic material. They roll a grid in, they pour the plastic in all the grids.
That's
It's called
right.
Blueprint. That holds up a little better than just, a pattern laid into the brick, because the plastic sort of holds the shape in between.
Yeah.
But obviously there's a cost differential at some point.
Right, concrete's a good idea. You know, if you're talking about street furniture and some of those other sort of details, it wouldn't be bad to get the public's sort of reaction to that kind of stuff.
Yep. Now, something, Clark, you just say, as you kind of dragged us down into this area, and I don't mean that in a bad way.
Yeah, the
where
Highland
Jonathan
Ave-
was, well, no, where Jonathan was concerned with that 2-foot grass panel. Something I just was thinking is, you have all this beautiful brick here. What if we considered, instead of grass, doing a 2-foot brick accent all the way down between the parking lane and that 10-foot walk, to kind of draw that brick all the way down, and then maybe we continue it all the way down into this area, so you're tying the village to the harbor with kind of that brick motif.
Sounds good. And then the dogs poop on the other side of the street, right?
That's the idea. That's the idea, is to have unit paving part of that whole system, whether or not it's a 2-foot brick or it's 8-foot or 10-foot brick with
Yep.
two different colors in it. I
Yep.
think that's the idea.
Okay. It just made me think about when we kind of came down to that area, and I was reminded again how much brick that you have and how pretty it is down in this area, and we keep saying that the thought is to tie this end to this end. That maybe helps. So like you said, whether it's the sidewalk is completely brick the whole way, or it's concrete with, maybe a color of concrete, just so it's not, pure gray or something, and then a 2-foot accent all the way down. Or Jonathan will probably tell me it's better to be 16 inches or something because of a brick size or something, but just a thought.
I would encourage us to use unit papers and not concrete as our starting point, and see if we can buy that, afford it.
Okay. All right, so I
We
think,
try to do brick all the way from. We tried to do brick all the way from the intersection of Ripley all the way down to almost the fire station. And there were a couple of select people who absolutely were totally opposed to it. They were concerned they'd get their high heels stuck in it would be uneven and unstable. Obviously, they don't spend a lot of time in Boston, but I think it would have looked wonderful.
Well, I think, Tom,
We did manage to get some brick accents, but that's the.
we've got some perfect examples right now on the corner of Elm Street and North Main Street, South Main Street, that are those brick, those brick corners. As there's also some up at Ripley, that brick is perfectly smooth. There's no joints. It's all butt jointed. There's no heel places for them to get stuck. They're on a very good base of some sort. So, and there's different select board people now. So let's give it a shot.
I think it'll look wonderful.
Thank
The other
you.
thing that would look wonderful, you talked about getting rid of the wires and the poles. That's
Yeah. No,
Open up your wallet, Tom.
What?
Open up your wallet.
That was a
Serious
very
money.
very quick discussion, Tom.
Well, if the whole town would agree to pay for it in their electric bills, which was proposed before, it was like 10 cents a month for 20 years, and the town voted it down. And I think that's certainly
Oh,
to make downtown Cohasset look maybe 100% better.
right.
absolutely.
We could go back to town meeting. Maybe people have gotten smarter over the years.
Well, several people have told me they think the town has changed. The complexion of the town has changed. You have a lot of more young people who spend time in the village and would appreciate that change. Also, you'd have more room on your sidewalks, because the poles are right in the middle of this, take up 1/3 of the sidewalk in places.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's an issue relative to accessible route standards in terms of minimum width. So, yep.
One thing also,
Another, the one,
one thing to keep in mind too is that I recently got a call from my good friend Mitch McConnell, who tells me that Cohasset is going to come into some of Uncle Joe's largesse. in the amount of over $100 million. So this is for infrastructure. So we should keep that in mind, that there is a gravy train coming. I have no idea. It's supposed to be for infrastructure. And if we can divert some of that to burying the power lines, all for it.
Yeah, subsequent generations would thank us for being very wise people.
One other thing to think about with burying the lines, not to discourage it, but it will likely elongate schedule because you gotta coordinate with the utility companies and all the homeowners in the area. So just something else to consider.
Just a quick question, just Jim or Jeff. What is a round number for by the mile for putting wires underground? Because it's not just electric now. We've got town fiber that's on there. There's Verizon, there's Comcast, there's everybody. If you look at the poles going down Elm Street, there's a smorgasbord of who we have to deal with.
We actually brought this up. We had a little graphic, Chief, last time. Fortunately, I think you might not have been with us. The base cost is somewhere between $800 and $1,000 a lineal foot. And that all depends on what's on the pole. Then you've got to look at every property owner has to be on board because now you've got to connect. So the properties on the north that you suddenly have to go underground 300, 400, 500 feet up to their house, you've got to figure in that cost. The town has to hire an electrician to tie into everybody's house because the utility company won't do it. So you got to coordinate with every property owner, make sure there's no issues with current code that have to be upgraded at the panel when they bring it in, because the power company, if there's going to be a change, they want everything per code. Then the other thing to consider is every one of the transformers that's on the poles out there, whether it's single phase or three phase, has to now go on the ground. So now we've got to look at appropriate prices based on working with the utility company and say, okay, we need to put single phase transformers and possibly three phase, if there is three phase in the downtown or down near the harbor, to accommodate commercial use. Those range, I had a picture actually from Chittenden Road, that subdivision over there, and there was a transformer because all those lines in that subdivision were underground. And you're talking like a 3x4 transformer that then has to have a clear path for them to be able to open it and whatnot. And that's a single phase. When you get to the three phase, some of those can be 4 feet by 10 feet long and the front opens up the other way. Then, like you say, you've got fiber, you've got communication, fire alarm if you have any. These are all considerations that can change, can change that cost potentially that need to be kind of taken in. So that $800 to $1,000 is based on some other projects that we've done in other communities. And there's the transformer in the middle and the bottom right there. So you have to find spaces for those. If we can't fit them, then you got to get easements and figure out property owners that are going to work with you or do takings, that bad word we were talking about before. So that is just a consideration. Not saying it can't be done, not saying it's completely insurmountable, but it's something that you have to kind of consider. That's actually the pole by the fire station that you were talking about, Chief, with all the wires up there. Yep. So as you can see, pretty much every one of those wires goes underground. And then each utility has their requirements. So the duct bank under the ground, power doesn't like to go near telecommunications because the power line creates a magnetic field which can interrupt communication lines. So they like to be like a foot to 18 inches apart from each other. So the actual width of that underground conduit now starts to get to be 4 or 5 feet wide and 2 or 3 feet deep type of consideration. So that figures into where's your drainage now go and how do we get drainage in amongst all this stuff. So there are a lot of things that moving parts when you start talking underground utilities.
Jeff, just because I see that 2.2 to 2.8, unfortunately, we're talking about the Cove also, and we're talking about sea rise, and we know that far end of Elm Street floods. Is that something that would have to be considered also? Does that raise the price of this?
Good. It's all going to depend on the utility companies and what they are considering as extra precautions. They may have to have, if there's any sort of underground structures or pull boxes or unit boxes, they're all gonna have to maybe be special sealed units. They may want everything encased in concrete so that there's less chance of water infiltrating into any of the joints of the actual underground conduit. And that would raise these prices up. These are without even talking to the utility company about all the resiliency type things that may come into effect. This is just kind of a straight rough cost to give you kind of the lower end of what you're talking money-wise.
It also doesn't include cost to individual homeowners to upgrade electric or any of that stuff, right?
Right, it depends on how you do that. If the town is gonna pay to tie all the way in up to people's homes, or whether that's gonna be up to each individual landowner. It also, the design, the construction cost certainly isn't paid for by the utility. That's gonna have to be on the town or some other funding source. They may or may not help with the design cost. That's kind of their purview. Some will, some won't. So you have to kind of figure in that design cost. I mean, we certainly, or whoever can work with them in terms of laying out the conduit, but they need to kind of design how many conduits they need, what size to fit the line they need. You know, those sort of aspects still have to be considered for undergrounding.
Yeah, so we'd love to help you do it, but there's a lot of considerations here, just, you know, to be aware of. I also know we're closing in on the end time for this, right? And will the Zoom meeting just end? If I remember correctly, that's kind of how it works, right?
I don't have another one scheduled immediately after, so we should be all right. But I'm glad to bring that up because I just want to ask a question about schedule and where we're at, what we need to do between now and the 7th, and is the 7th still a realistic date to hold our forum?
How many days is that from now?
That is, open my calendar.
It's about a week and a half.
Yep, and Monday's a holiday.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's up to these guys. If it slips, I'm okay with that, provided that we have the best thing for the public.
So what do we want? What would you guys like us to present to the public? Do you want us to update the concepts the way Jeff was suggesting earlier before we go to the public?
Yep.
Yeah, and then does this group want to have time to review that and look at it before we go to a public forum?
Do you want to look at it one more time? Well, I mean, it's possible that they could email it out prior to the meeting, and if we had any comment tweaks a couple of days before the public forum, we could send them all out.
So on the idea of the concepts, do you want us to just show line work so you can see what's under the line work similar to the 2 harbor plans? Or do you want something that's got the greens and the grays?
Yeah, I think the greens and the grays, and in order for people to understand it. And maybe have like, this is what it is right now, and then here's the new one. So it's possible to do them side by side as a part of the presentation to the public.
I think the line overlays over the Google stuff is probably pretty understandable by the public as opposed to just line drawings.
Right, but they like poche in the gray and the green for
Yeah.
areas. Yeah, that's
Like you were showing us, Jeff.
Yeah, the one, the core piece.
Yep, definitely over a Google Maps, because people just relate to those details.
We can do side by sides, but I think that the resolution will get pretty tight. So it could be like one slide after another, so we can go back and forth, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you think that you would also introduce your sections, or the section in the main section of the center section of Elm?
We certainly could. We could update that.
Right. That sounds great.
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful. I don't think we need sections at the other 2 ends necessarily because they'd be too long. But the section in the center would be probably very useful. Not sure everybody would understand them, but you can describe them as like slicing through a pie or something.
Yep.
They told us first day of architecture school, slicing through a box of cereal. I think it was Wheaties.
Wheaties.
And they had a box of cereal and the Wheaties fell all over the place. Oh, okay.
See, for us, they told us an apple because you can visualize what the inside of the apple looks like.
There you go.
Similar. I'm just looking at schedule. So today's the 26th, so that would give us, you basically would need us to turn something around to you in a week with the holiday.
Yeah, because the 7th is actually a Monday too, so you just have next week.
Right, which is a short week with the holiday.
Yeah.
How about an extra week? Would that kill anything?
I
It would
think,
help us, but Jim, it's up to you.
so I'm fine with that. I will point out, let's see here. This is kind of the wrong schedule because I opened up another PowerPoint, but going back to the schedule. So I just want to clear it with everybody. And Lauren, I know you and I have talked about this before, and your feeling is that, you know, it's okay to take a little bit longer as long as, you know, you get the product and, you know, a good product. And so it's fine with me. It'll just push things out on this end a little bit. We're starting to look more and more like the concept part of this is getting wrapped up in early August as opposed to late July.
Well, instead of the 7th, what about the 10th, the Thursday? That would give you 2 weeks in one day.
I'm not here that day, so I'm gonna have to have Jason be the leader of that then. if
Or the
possible.
9th? What about the 9th?
We have a planning board meeting that night.
Oh,
The 10th is also tough for me. I have 3 things already booked for the afternoon of the 10th, including bargaining with the union.
Yeah, I'll be going to
Won't be in
Charleston
the
that
island.
day. So,
whenever you think, whenever's best.
I mean, I'm totally fine with the idea of pushing it out a week the way it was originally suggested. I just, you
To the
know,
14th?
yeah, I just want to make sure that when we're doing that, that we're not pinching ourselves so hard on the other side of this, that it's going to cause problems for you guys as a town.
No,
I don't know if it really helps to add a day if we did June 8th. I don't even know if the select board's meeting on the 8th.
The only
You
thing I
know,
would say,
Jim, I think because of sort of the progress we made today, you guys are already ahead relative to your objective of your end product being the concept plan. I mean, you're going to be doing, after this next forum, you're going to be tweaking stuff from here to the end. So you might not even have to go into early August. I'm just throwing that out, that basically you're already ahead of the game, I think, here based on today's meeting. So
Well,
that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's a good thing.
That's
So I
assuming
appreciate the
we,
vote
that's
of
assuming we get
confidence.
consensus from the public.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. But we're not going to be going backwards substantially.
Yeah, so I just say, Mike, I appreciate the vote of confidence. And again, I don't have a problem pushing it out a week. It's fine with me. But after we do the concepts, then we want to do renderings and then we pull together, you know, sort of brief report that goes along with this.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, and so it's, you know, we're roughly ending up about a month further out than we originally planned on.
Okay,
I don't think it's the end of the world, but
okay.
when I make changes in schedules like that with a client, I like to make sure the client's okay with it, you know?
Yeah, good. Well, Lauren has to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion has been all along is that this is a really important community project. I would rather, you know, how long has Elm Street been the way it is? I think one more month to get it right and make sure that the community is happy and pleased with the process. I am willing to be flexible on that. So if we want to plan then for the week of the 14th instead of the 7th, then I'll make the arrangements to do that.
I think it allows us the ability to maybe get you something like, say, on the 9th or 8th or something, you guys to give us some comments, and if you can push it to the middle of the week on the the 14th, it gives us the ability to adjust anything based on your comments. The only thing we would ask is if everybody has comments, is maybe everything goes back to Lauren and kind of gets looked at and puts on one kind of set for us to review, rather than one person tells us go left, the other tells us to go right, and then we have to make the decision, do we go left or do we go right?
That's fair, Jeff. That's fair.
Yeah. So let me ask this, if I throw some dates out, if we plan a forum on June 16th, then working backwards, can the Elm Street Corridor Group meet on the 9th? So that we can sort of collect our thoughts and give the final feedback back to Weston and Sampson, so we are prepared for the 16th.
Start with me.
Good with me.
Okay.
All right.
So then for Jeff, Jim, and Jonathan, does having it to us by June 8th work?
I believe I can. I know one of my junior engineers that's working with this on me is taking a little time, but I think we can work around that.
Okay.
What time would we meet with the general public? Would it be an evening meeting?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's all right. I have something else going on the 16th, and that I can't move, and I want to make sure I'm not conflicting with it. Hold on just a second.
I've got to sign out for dinner. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Clark. I'll see you at 7.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. I think this was great. I really appreciate everybody's input, the feedback, the back and forth talking. That was great.
You're
Yeah, this
welcome.
is a
Thank
really
you.
productive meeting. Thank
And
you
I
very
will-
much, all of you.
I'll help Tom with the navigation of the the agenda and the website.
Oh, so, Tom, moving forward, anytime you're looking for a public meeting, if you go to the plain class@ma.org page, scroll all the way to the bottom, the public meeting calendar and all of the meetings that take place are listed under there. So you don't have to navigate to the individual committee pages.
I think he's left.
No, he's still here.
Oh,
He's
he
still
is.
here, he's just on mute.
Okay, great.
And we can always count on your friend Tim to send you an agenda as well.
You bet.
All right, so
Thank you.
everyone, are we set? I'm sure I'll connect with Jim. Other than that, is this a good plan?
Yep.
Think we're good.
All right, well, thank you all so much. It's a really productive meeting. I'll be in touch soon about our next meetings, and I hope everyone has a nice rest of your afternoon.
And Lauren, I just want to say, as long as it's after 6 or after, it works for me.
Okay.